The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
Today's topic is the value of vendor debriefings. And let's go ahead and dive into this. I think we've all been involved in debriefings one way or the other. And we're going to actually break this down here, provide some key things that we need to think about to make this a more effective and enjoyable process as we go through this. So really briefly, so we're all on the same page here. Before our award on any type of project, we treat that as confidential. Pre-award is confidential, meaning that when information is submitted to us as the owner, as the procurement team, that stays private until after that award has been made. So post-award, we make the contract and we go forward and go through the next steps here. Our focus here then is what actually happens on this post-award side of things in terms of debriefings and when we need to do everything related to that. So debriefings, again, just to be on the same page here, is a formal process that we provide feedback to the vendors about how they did. This could include reasons why they did well, high scores, low scores, recommendations for improvement, anything that can really be done to make their future proposals better and perhaps more efficient. This can be done in person or in writing. You can do through email, it can be done through a letter. Most of the time I've seen these done that are done in person. That's typically the best way to get some of this done here. Now, unlike other Ask the RFP Doctor sessions, we're going to take a bit of a twist here today. I'm going to do a poll of folks, and I want to get a better feel for what your experiences have been with this vendor debriefing process. So our first question here is, I'm going to go ahead and launch this, and it should pop up on your screen here, is how frequently does your organization offer debriefings to suppliers? How often do you offer them to these suppliers? Doesn't mean you actually do it, but you offer it. So go ahead and submit your ratings and we'll go through and do the next question. Participation is good. Everybody that participates gets a high five.
Jake, why don't I get to vote?
Well, Brian, you're a host, so your vote matters to me, right? Okay, so a couple more seconds here. We got 2 more people that need to vote, and we'll cut off here. All right, survey says, let's take a look at the results on this question. Really interesting results. It's almost split completely down the line here. Always at 30%, very often at 15%, sometimes 21%, rarely and never. Okay, really, really good information, right? So when we think about why these debriefings aren't offered, it's probably because of a couple of reasons. One, we've never done it before, so we don't know how to do it. Or 2, perhaps we're concerned that what might actually transpire during those debriefing sessions. And really good because there's some key things to think about that. And that's why we have today's session, all right? So let's do that here. And I'm gonna offer one more poll here and then we'll move on to the rest of the presentation. This next one is, for those of you who have done a debriefing either once or many times, I wanna learn a little bit more about your experiences with that. So how would you describe your typical debriefing experience? It's amazing, the best thing since sliced bread. Nah, neither good nor bad, just something we have to do. It's terrible, it's a huge stress, lots of disagreement, or perhaps you've never done it before. How would you describe your typical debriefing experience?
And Jake, while the poll numbers are coming in, there's been some good questions popping into the chats. So maybe we could take just a moment and let Olivia speak up here after we get through the poll question and ask what she was thinking there. We also have a question about how many vendors actually request debriefings as we go through things.
Very good, very good. All right, a few more seconds here. All right, about 5 more seconds.
Hey, Jake, Dawn said that she can't see the poll. Can anybody else not see the poll?
We've got good response. Chances are, if you're not on the Zoom app, then the polls may not come through correctly. And Don, that might be what the issue is here. But we'd glad to chat with you afterward if we need to. Sorry about that, Don. Okay, last call here, about 5 more seconds, and then we'll close this thing up. Okay, and this is the end of the poll. Okay, really interesting results here. So based on the results here, more than half of you say that it's sometimes good, sometimes bad. It's just something that you have to do because that's what you have to do. Not good, not bad. It's just a fact of life, right? Some of you have really good experiences, and there's been a smaller handful that have not really done that before. So this is good because our goal here at the end of today's session is to help move everybody, or at least provide the opportunity to move everybody to the amazing category, right? We actually want to provide some specific things here about to make your next debriefing a better experience. At this point in time here, Olivia, did you have a question or a comment you wanted to add to this? If that's the case here, go ahead and
I
please do that.
do. I do indeed. Hello, good morning, everyone. And my name is Olivia Freeman. I'm one of the contracting managers at the Metropolitan Water District in Southern California. And basically, we were raised, if any of you know him, Mike Kola-Disner from NIGP, to do debriefs. And we had a very rigorous debrief process where you invited suppliers, at the end of your announcement, you're welcome to join it, have a debrief with us. More times than not, they wanted the debrief. So staff was spending a lot of time in preparation. Then they wanted it in writing. It got to be really, really rigorous. And what we found is that people were defensive. Well, why did, because obviously I do professional services, so it's not a low bid. So people were very defensive of a subjective rating. Well, why not this? Why not that? And actually, several times it led to them filing a protest, for which at our agency is very rigorous and time consuming. So we decided as a best practice that what we were going to do, which is what I put in the chat, really you need to know how you performed relative to the other suppliers. So our recommendation to award memo shows the criteria, the overall ranking. It doesn't give, independent comments about how each supplier performed, but it shows you in a ranking, relatively speaking. So what we started doing instead was that when people ask for the debrief, we send them the public records associated with the acquisition, the winning bid, like I said, the recommendation memo, and really got away from doing the verbal. And so when I saw this come up today in the email, I was really intrigued to hear from all of you about how you handle it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Absolutely. And thank you, Olivia, so much for sharing that. I really appreciate those comments. That's part of the goal of today's presentation is to talk about, we're recommending this, and the last we want is to have more protest, right? So our goal here is to provide some specifics here about how to avoid that. And again, Olivia, I really, really appreciate your experiences and what you've kind of seen with that. And what you're recommending and what you've done is very in alignment with what we're going to kind of talk about today as well. So let's keep going here. For those of you who have been in our CP classes before, whether our virtual training events or other venues, is that we have these foundations of procurement excellence. And you might be thinking to yourself, wait, what? Why are we talking about this when we're going through vendor debriefings? One's an administrative function, the other one is just a theoretical feel-good thing. And not at all here. The CP foundations of procurement excellence are directly tied to why we do vendor debriefings. We want to have a procurement process that's fair, open, transparent, and ensures that our process is done fairly with integrity, right? And the reason why we do these things here is that we want to become seen by the industry as a client of choice. A client of choice means that the vendors, the suppliers, when they look at you as a buyer of services, they want to work for you. They know that they can maximize their profits, which is not a bad thing. That's a really good thing. We know that they can get in, get out, and deliver a high quality project that is a win-win for both you and them as a supplier. You want this to be seen by the industry as that client of choice. And the way we do that is that fundamentally is that we adhere to these practices here, these procurement fundamentals on the left-hand side here. This is what we want to do. And vendor debriefings, frankly, are a huge part of that, is offering these effectively that can lead us to this higher level that we want to be on, right? So what that means here is that a client of choice, specifically part of that, is that every vendor has an equal opportunity to win, right? We don't make the playing field level in terms of opportunity. Now, when you hire somebody, of course, you want to hire experts, and you want to make sure your procurement process identifies quickly who those experts are and bring them onto your site. But fundamentally, everybody has an equal chance here to actually win the project. It's kind of like a flower, right? You wouldn't be seen as attractive to all the honeybees, all the vendors out here to come and be a part of your project. You would be seen as that client of choice. There's lots of fish in the sea, and you want to be seen as the one that the industry wants to work for. And by offering debriefings, by having a procurement process that is organized, by having RFPs that are well structured, having a clear scope of work, which is everything that CP talks about, you will then be seen as a client of choice. It's not going to happen overnight here, but if you adhere to these things and you push these things forward here, you will have an impact with this. So when you have a poor quality debriefing, there's some things that happen in the psyche of the vendor that goes on here, right? The first thing is that we make certain assumptions about who the client is or about how they conducted their procurement. And if there's a poor reputation about us as a buyer of services, that's likely going to minimize or mitigate how many future proposals are going to happen on that project, on your procurements. We don't want that, right? Protests. Some of us have been involved with that before. It's a very difficult, challenging thing to be part of, right? We don't want to deal with that. We want to minimize the chances of that happening. And the way we do that, again, is by having a clear, well-stated procurement process. And in fact, what we advocate for here is that if we do effective debriefings and actually work with the vendors, explain to them, here's what happened, that will go therefore in the future minimize the chances of other protests happening in the future, right? Our goal here is to offer these debriefings to everybody. And because fundamentally, we want better proposals. If you offer debriefings on a regular basis and vendors participate and their proposals get better, that's a good thing for everybody. It's good for us as the owner. It's good for the industry. We want to raise the tides of quality of proposals here. And if we all get better, that's a win-win for everybody. We want that to happen. Greater accountability. And honestly, this builds goodwill. We want this, right? Vendors should commonly say about your debriefing process, this is the best thing I've ever been a part of. Vendors spend a lot of time putting together proposals, and the fact that you offer and take the time to offer comments about what was received well versus what wasn't can really more directly, probably than anything you can do, is say to the industry, we want to be that client of choice. Send us your best proposals. We will take them, right? We want to see that, right? And if we're not willing to do that, then that may not happen, right? So what happens here is that a lot of the time is that as a supplier, you will submit a proposal, it goes into the black box, and therefore we have no idea what happened, right? I have been on the other side of the proposals where we submit proposals, they go into the black box, and the debriefing scenario is literally 2 sentences about what happened. I can tell you on that side of things, or having submitted these things in the past, it is extremely frustrating not to know what in the world happened, right? On the vendors, you should ask if you have, if you're close with your contractors or suppliers or whoever, ask them, how much time and effort does it take to put together a proposal? And the answer, I think, will shock you if you're not aware. Jeff can talk about this later about how much time it takes as a contractor to put together a proposal. It is thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to put together a proposal. And not have at least a description of what actually happened here is incredibly frustrating. Okay, so let's go through a couple examples here. This is slightly tweaked, but this is based on a real debriefing letter, right? So thank you for your proposal submission. We appreciate your time and effort that you put in the response. Your proposal is comprehensive, but we selected another proposal that better fit for our needs. Again, we really appreciate your submission. We encourage you to participate on future efforts. Okay, what do we think about this? What's kind of your gut reaction? I know my gut reaction is something like this. Worst thing ever, right? Nothing puts a worse taste in your mouth by giving some generic thing they just copy and paste off Google and put it into a letter here, because it doesn't tell us anything. Our goal of a debriefing is not to explain why somebody lost. That's not our goal here. Our goal here is to, one, convince them that your procurement was fair. And two, is that they want to propose on the future project, on the next project. That's why we do debriefings. If we can convince them that it was done fairly, nobody can argue that. They can try to argue, but frankly, if here's what we did, everything is laid out here. We followed our process. It's just fair to everybody. What we have found, and I mean, Brian and I have worked on hundreds of products on lots of different things here. We have found that when you do debriefings effectively, the vendor's response is not of, well, I'm going to find a way to protest. I'm going to find a crack in your procurement process. And instead, it's more like, thank you so much. We want to get better. We really, really appreciate that. That's what happens. The nature of the conversation changes when we actually have a sincerity about, we wanted this to get better. We actually want to help you with this. Okay, here's a different scenario. And this kind of goes to some of the things that Olivia had said about, here's the different factors that we looked at, right? Here's where you as a vendor placed relative to these other areas. Second best on their cost, approach was first, experience was fourth, and so on here, right? So if you compare these two different options here, one on the left is just a narrative from Google, and on the right-hand side is actually some relative comparisons here. This is a lot better. Why is this one on the right here a lot better? Anybody have any ideas about this? Like specific, what makes this better on the right-hand side? Especially for your vendor. Any thoughts? Put in the chat box. Yeah, Diana, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, they know exactly what they wrote. So then if I'm looking at this, I know that my area where I need to add some additional information would be factor 3 in terms of experience, factor 5 qualifications. Those would be areas that for my team that we would need to work on.
That's exactly right. That is spot on, Dana. Thank you so much. See, if I'm like a sales manager with a supplier and I get this kind of information, what am I going to do with my team? We're going to have a training session, maybe bring in somebody. We're going to work on how do we better communicate our experience? How do we do interviews more effectively? I mean, if you are on the supplier side of things and you have this type of information, you can target where you need to spend your time and effort. We only have so much time and effort, right? And now all of a sudden we can know where to focus our efforts on and understand, well, here's where the improvements might need to be at. And furthermore, scenario 3 here is maybe a little bit more detail, right? Maybe these numbers here are the differences or maybe the averages compared to where you're at. So if you knew what your scores are, or maybe provide your scores and you can understand, here's where you compare it at, and here's where your costs are at, right? So having specificity here as best we can is really a good way to focus on things, because if we know where to focus at, this is where we can spend our time and effort to make sure that we actually deliver something that is beneficial to our teams that are also going to compete in the future. So our recommendation, CP's recommendation, is to provide the vendors with as much information as you possibly can to help them understand why they lost. That is our goal here, to actually work with them to say, here's where the concern's at with the committees. And to do that, a kind of way to think about this, Brian made fun of me about this, but we call this the 3 S's to great debriefing. The first one is to summarize the evaluation process. Actually state to the vendors in this debriefing, here's what we did. And honestly, a lot of this should be a copy and paste job from the RFP, right? If you've written this up in your RFP, it's already laid out here, then this is just a copy and paste, right? Summarize the evaluation process. The second part of this is to synthesize the evaluator comments, is to go through and look at the comments from the evaluators and come up with an overall consensus of what they had said, both good and bad. Synthesize their comments. And lastly, is state the vendor's relative evaluation scores. How did you compare, the person being evaluated, compared to somebody else that's being proposed here, right? The relative evaluation scores can help us understand, how do I compare to the competition? So what does this actually mean, right? What this means here is, when you summarize the evaluation process, how many proposals were received, right? How many companies actually proposed here? How was the proposal evaluated? Again, this is from the RFP. Step 1, we did this. Step 2, we did this. Maybe another thing to summarize part of this is, how was the shortlist determined? If you have a shortlist, how did you actually figure that out? If the RFP says we'll pick the top 3, well, then that's a pretty easy answer. If there's some other criteria you looked at, then just explain what that was here. Whatever you use to do that shortlist is what you want to explain. In terms of the second part of this, the evaluator comments, really look at what did they like versus what they did not like, right? And we have other examples in our virtual RFP training courses. We actually have a really deep dive into this, and we talk about how to actually summarize these comments from evaluators. But essentially, what we think about is, relative to other people, where did this vendor compare? Where do they shine, and where do they not do so well? Now, the implication behind this is that your evaluators are actually providing their comments. And if your evaluators don't do that, then some training, I think, is probably needed to encourage them or explain to them, like, I have to sit here and talk to these vendors, and without your information, without your comments, it makes my job a lot more difficult. So I need you to do this. And you can work with them to explain, here's why we're actually looking for this. And lastly, the evaluation scores, just how do they compare to other vendors, to other suppliers on this project? So you can do averages, you can do percent differences, just some way to compare, relatively speaking, how do they perform? Now, a bonus one is, maybe you could also do is ask the vendors for their feedback, right? You go through the debriefing, you walk through everything, and ask them, can you send us a letter about any comments you may have about our procurement process? Or just lay this out verbally, we can talk about this, because what this can do here is really provide good insights for you as a procurement organization for future RFPs. So having the vendor's feedback about what actually happened here can be tremendously valuable to you as you look to continuously improve your projects and your processes. So again, to wrap things up here, is that a poor quality debriefing, many times people make assumptions about us as a client, as a buyer of these services. There's a poor reputation that leads to lower future response rates. We don't want that. We want to be seen as a fish in the sea, and not as this fish with teeth in it, sharp teeth, right? I mean, we don't want to look like that, right? This can also actually eliminate protests. We have found, in fact, in this one state we did a bunch of procurements in, is that we found that by providing the debriefings on a regular basis, the overall quality of proposals went up over time. In fact, what this owner did is that they posted all of the debriefings on the website. So they had a summary of the, now you didn't know who was who, it was all coded, which is fine. But they posted on a website of, here's the evaluation model, here's the scores, here's their narrative of why we did what we did. And they posted that for like 300 projects. I mean, this really, more than anything, can tell the industry, we want to be seen as a client of choice. We want the best proposals. And if not, I mean, frankly, people will imagine the worst and they'll assume that we actually didn't have a fair procurement, that we just picked our favorite at the end of the day here. So in summary, when you go through these debriefings, is firstly do it. We recommend to do that. Is try to help the vendors understand what they could do to be better. We want better proposals. Be as transparent as you can, and vendors would generally really appreciate that. So with this point in time here, we'll go ahead and take some time for questions. Then a few minutes here, we'll break up into our virtual peer groups. So let's go ahead and take some questions about this. Or if Jeff or Brian, if you have any other comments, feel free to jump in here. But what questions or comments do we have?
I'm just going to say we've been trying to keep up on the chat because lots of questions came in. But if we missed you, feel free to repost or re-remind.
Great. Diana, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, with the whole world converting basically to virtual, we were used to, having our selection advisory committees, come in person and we're able to get them to write on a piece of paper what their evaluation was of particular proposals. But here now in this virtual world, everyone seems to be my teachers, they provide a wealth of of comments in the evaluation. But in the non the ones that are not teachers, I'll say it like that, how are folks finding obtaining, like, what are you using to obtain to get the best evaluations from the committee, from the selection committees that are reviewing the proposals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll offer my 2 cents, but if there's anybody else in the audience that wants to chime in here, the one thing I would say here is that we have to look at our overall evaluation process. And what I mean by that is that if what we're asking our evaluators to do is very cumbersome, that is, dozens and dozens of pages, hours interviewing folks, that's a huge burden on folks, and that might be, less an incentive for them to also provide comments and those evaluation scores. So I would encourage, and again, Diane, I'm not in any way suggesting you all have this at all, but I'm encouraging folks that we have to look at the amount of effort we're asking our evaluators to do overall, and there's opportunities to minimize time in those evaluation processes. That's a very good thing that we should be kind of thinking about here. But I'll definitely invite the audience or Brian or anybody else here to also chime in and provide their comments or thoughts as well.
Yeah, Jake, I was going to harken back to someone in the chat, I can't remember who it was, mentioned about collecting, strengths and weaknesses and pros and cons, that type of content from the evaluators as they're reviewing things. And I would say that falls in line with our evaluation training courses that we do at CPE, where the way we structure the evaluation forms and templates, whether it's being done, pencil and paper or most of the time electronically nowadays. That's how I like to collect comments back, because that helps build the debriefing.
And then from my perspective, I think whether it's old school, when we actually got to see each other live, versus new school, unfortunately, I think that one of the biggest rifts we have in our businesses is that between us as procurement folks and our internal clients, who are usually the evaluators. And I think some of that relationship building, the training of them early, making sure they understand what's in it for them. There's a personal ROI for doing that. That's the short term and long term. And if you can start to explain that, you'll increase your response rate out of your evaluators.
Great, thank you. Hopefully, Diana, that helps out a little bit. Any other questions or comments?
I had a quick question on, does it make a difference, or is it easier doing it, with an automatic opening of some sort versus having your evaluation committee either meeting virtual or live to be able to get all that information? Because right now we're still doing, I'm going to call them live opening. We have to send all the RFPs out, have them evaluated, and then get all that, and then hold a meeting and have all that information come in. But now with some of these programs that are going through that are doing the opening for the RFP and then sending all that documentation to your evaluators directly, is those comments being captured in that audit, in that format, and is it easier in that format than it is in distributing everything out and then collecting it back?
Yeah, I think Brian, I'll ask you to kind of take this one. I know Brian's worked on a couple of recent almost virtual procurements and how to deal with some of the electronic things in terms of collecting responses and working with the evaluators. Brian, do you want to offer some of your comments and experiences that you've kind of seen recently?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. I was chatting.
No problem. Essentially, and Don, I'll kind of summarize, but essentially is in this world of virtual procurements that we're kind of seeing nowadays, how do we engage more with our evaluators, with our vendors, different things, and how do we kind of go through it and deal with that process? I mean, Don, does that kind of capture the essence of what you're asking about?
Yeah, like I said, I just more of, is it easier to try to capture those comments because it's virtual and
Yeah,
your evaluators are online doing it versus, hoping that they put their notes on the evaluation score sheet
yeah.
and give you valid comments and information back so that you can share it in a debrief.
Gotcha. Yeah, and sorry I missed that the first time around. I like I like collecting virtual copies of score sheets in the sense that just it's just purely selfish here, that it's so much easier to cut and paste and consolidate. And I usually do consolidations across for a large RFP. We evaluate the proposals, I consolidate comments and look for issues and things like that. Of course, that can help as we translate to a debriefing process too. So yeah, like scanned PDF pictures and things like that are the bane of our existence. Trying to like retype it up and read things. So there's some selfishness in my answer there, but we've had good experience. And this is even pre-pandemic and for years collecting the written evaluations in that manner, and then that can translate forward to how we're going to interact with vendors as well. I know that there's been some action in the chat about not sharing certain. You gotta be careful not to share individual comments from individual evaluators, and think about what the right balance is and things of that nature. So there's different ways to handle that. There's also comments in the chat about where's that line of giving comparative information to vendors, right? Of you're not going to share content from other vendor proposals, amongst the competitors and things like that. So that those are some of the lines where we're going to draw some boundaries in the sandbox.
Yeah, I think I'm just kind of getting the conversation in the chat box here with Colin and some other folks that concerns about a potential protest based on what we share here, and I think those are very legitimate concerns. And I think the only other thing I would advocate for here is, again, that if we continue to focus on the key fundamentals, procurement, successful procurement, fair, open, transparent, that can help eliminate the concerns that might be attached to a potential protest, right? If we really adhere to those principles when we deliver our procurements, that can eliminate. People can still protest. I've seen some very crazy protests over my time, but it can really help us minimize the potential impacts of that. Yeah.
One strategy too to help with that is kind of a softer thing, but in debriefings, when you're sharing written debriefing results, if you are going to send like something written, or you're going to review something written in a meeting, I always make sure as part of the debriefing document there's a blank section that says feedback from vendor, or if you're just doing things verbally, make that part of your formal agenda with them and kind of put it on them. Hey, give us feedback. Let us know what you thought, didn't like. I even let vendors send that in writing at a later date and make sure we get it documented. And I've had some vendors who are salty about this, that, or the other thing. And by saying, hey, we're documenting this, we're tracking it, we're sharing it internally, we'll take a look at this next time around, and not making any commitments, but just kind of saying, giving them that voice, right? Sometimes that helps, where they might feel like their only recourse is a formal protest. And sometimes that can diffuse the situation by just giving them a chance to air out grievances. Sometimes it's just emotional.
Absolutely. All right. Any other questions? Ben, I see your hand up. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so on our forums, we have a space for them to put comments. A lot of times they like to just put a score. And so I've oftentimes will send it back to the evaluator if they don't put comments, and just tell them, hey, please give me a comment, because we do have companies who ask for debriefs and want to get more details and information. So I need some more background on why you gave the score. And usually they'll then give me a comment. And so that then comes in very handy, because when we do have comments from evaluators, that makes the debrief so much easier, because when you're able to share maybe not sometimes a specific comment, or if you're able to give them information based on comments, the evaluators or the vendors really appreciate that. It makes a difference for them.
I was going to just pause and give you the pat on the back, Ben, that having the guts as the procurement agent to stop and go back and say, hey, this just isn't enough information. Even if they do give you a comment, if it's super bland and generic, like proposal was good, you see that stuff all the time. Like you have to be able to stop and say, I'm sorry, that's not sufficient. And in addition to what you said of like, hey, this is going to help with debriefings, the other thing is I kind of try to drop the hammer that says, I have nothing to justify your score, right? We need to be able to justify our evaluations to the public if need be, to our superiors as needed, and there's just no justification provided here. So yeah, help me out with the debriefing, but also like this just flat out isn't justifiable and we can't proceed.
Yeah, Brian, it just makes me think of it's kind of like procurement IQ. And what I mean by that is that by offering an effective debriefing process, by acting in the best interest of the public here, this is the real true value that one of the things that procurement can bring to the table here is by understanding here's what actually happened. That's how we protect really the taxpayer if you're a public entity of ensuring that this is what we're supposed to do. We know that things were done fairly.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.